Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, April 23rd, 2024. Oh, I don't know. The 23rd almost got me to say April 2023. Don't you wish it was April 2023? I don't know. What was going on? Weren't we better off at the time? Oh, no, that's right. We were, I don't know. Everything is always weren't you better off 4 years ago? No, we weren't. Well, weren't you better off 1 year ago? Well, I don't know. It was pretty much the same. I don't know. I should check the record on what were we doing on April 23rd, 2023? What if we had played a rerun for today? What would we have discovered? I don't know. But we got enough trouble in April 23rd, 2024 as it is. It is, day 2 of week 2 of the farting guy's trial up in New York. Things are shaping up nicely. Witnesses have been called. David Pecker made it to the stand yesterday. Everybody got to run around and say Pecker. That was fun as well. I'm not sure who's up today, although it Justice hints that maybe Stormy Daniels is getting set to be brought to the stage. I don't know whether, not to the stage. She's not performing, her usual act in the courtroom today. Although, well, that would explain not televising it, I guess. But it would be a lot more entertaining than most of what's going on. And Trump might stay awake for that one. I'm not sure. I'm not sure for how long. But at any rate, things progress there. We'll have to see what the live bloggers have to say about how things are progressing and whether he's asleep and whether he's emanating any odor or not, and how he's reacting to the witnesses being brought up to testify. And let's see, other things happening today. Well, golly, there's an awful lot. And I don't know how to cover it all. It's Passover. We made it to Passover. Last night was the night of the first Seder, which means that's why we didn't really talk too much about it yesterday. I don't know that we're going to talk too much about it today. There was a nice dinner. A story was retold. Of course, it happens in the midst of protest, and of course, the protest happens as a result of ongoing war. And, well, one of 15 ongoing wars around the world, of course. I don't know. Now we have universities in shambles, but mostly because it seems, I don't know, the reflection I'm getting of it is that mostly because the administration of these universities, I think, maybe by design, were shaken up by Republican reactionaries calling university presidents before Congress and admonishing them over not reacting strongly enough against, well, I think what they were aiming for was reacting against pro-Palestinian demonstration on campus on the premise, of course, that by itself was definitionally anti-Semitic. And, well, not a whole lot of people actually believe that very strongly around here anyway. But at any rate, I think it prompted, at least in the case of Columbia University, where the president I don't think was among those called out the first time around, still getting a clear message from political leaders that something needs to be done about all these protesters and the backlash against the protest as it manifested in Columbia. Apparently, rather, well, I mean, I guess you can say this, it's not kosher for Passover, but ham-fisted in the way they reacted and over the top. I mean, I've seen universities before. I don't know that they would have gotten the same reaction for prohibiting the tent city occupation of university property. That's not something you usually get away with in these situations. But then, in addition, of course, banning these students from returning to campus, suspending them, throwing them out of their classes, throwing them out of their residence halls, apparently, as well. That doesn't seem to be on a par with the level of disruption from the protest, of course. Yeah, people are made to feel unsafe sometimes when they go nearby and confront protesters, I'm sure. And, of course, it should probably also be noted that there are, I hate to use this phrase, just the way it was uncomfortable to say, well, I think Russians might be interfering with our elections and pulling some shenanigans. The Russians are to blame. Outside agitators. Ooh. I think that's probably a large portion of the problem. Columbia is, I think, uniquely situated, being in New York City, of course, to be able to draw from a large population, some of whom, a larger number, presumably, than most cities of Arab Americans, with a few exceptions, of course, like in the Detroit area, Palestinians in particular, plus, of course, some ordinarily, people who are open to radicalization and who are also sympathizers, who are, I think, only too enthusiastic about showing up and hanging about nearby, either sometimes joining the protesters or loitering nearby the gates if they are barred from entering campus, as they now are, and making their annoying presence known. And it's become a real headache for the student protest leaders as well. And they have to disavow their vociferous, these other outside protesters, sometimes vociferous anti-Semitism. And, they're doing an admirable job disavowing it, as are other supporters online. But it does happen, and it's making people feel threatened, and there's not much use in telling them not to feel threatened when there are people showing up to threaten them. But it would be wise, if you can, to compartmentalize and realize who's doing what to whom and why, and who should be held accountable for what. I can only tell you this. Hey, sometimes when you organize a large-scale movement or organization, it sucks to be tagged with the faults of people who glom onto your thing and claim identity with it. And sometimes the identity is real, sometimes it's not, and they still go too far, and you find yourself being held accountable for things that you wish they hadn't done. But that sounds kind of familiar. So, that's the difficulty with these mass protests. Anyway, what can we say? Now the protests have spread, by the way, to other university campuses. Yale having a similar situation. Columbia now has had to, in order to enforce this stupid thing this regime they've put in place, they're now suspending all classes and going to all remote, instruction for the balance of the year, which I'm sure is only a couple of weeks. It's not that it's such a logistical hardship, but it is also ironic, of course, and people commenting all over the place. Hey, I'm so old, I remember when they said it was essential that classes meet in person and that it was extraordinarily detrimental to the quality of the education. And even if there's a deadly virus, we got to get the kids back in the classroom. And now, of course, there's vaccine for the deadly virus and much more protection and considerably less virulence, I guess. And yet, remote learning apparently the answer for the administrators at Columbia. I don't know how detrimental it's really going to be. I'm sure it would be better if everybody was back on schedule and there was no major disruption. I don't know. The one redeeming thing that the administration and faculty together, the faculty, by the way, rising up as well in opposition to the administration's response. So not a lot of contentment brought from this, and not a lot of relief from the protest, not a lot of relief from the backlash, not a lot of relief from the commentary about both the protest and the backlash. They haven't bought themselves anything. Probably the best thing that they can do with the student body is to say, all right, well, we're going to remote learning, and professors will start suspending their exams too, and saying, well, never mind, we won't have the final exam. And then, with the students, the vast majority of the student body will then say, yay, this all came out terrific, actually, and I only have fond memories of the whole thing, minus the protesters and, of course, the people who feel, rightly or not, that they've been targeted by the protesters. It's a mess. They have done themselves no favors there. I guess we'll segue into our own coverage of things by also pointing out that the backlash to the backlash to the backlash, do we have enough backlashes in there? I'm not sure, is that noted senatorial idiot Tom Cotton, as well as somebody else, too. Who else joined Tom Cotton this? I can't even remember. I'll scroll back and see. Somebody was making some comment and calling people out. But Tom Cotton, among others, going back to his one play. Tom Cotton loves to spot conflict, imagine it to be an existential danger to everyone in the country. Well, I mean, actually to right-wing lunatics in the country. Oh, Josh Hawley is now joining him as well. Two noted reactionary idiots. But both of them, Cotton most famously in his op-ed, I don't know, years ago in the New York Times, loves to react to these things by saying, call out the National Guard. We got to have federal troops, or federalized troops anyway, sweep away the protesters and stand in there and, of course, invoking, well, we have to protect the rights of those that they're targeting. But that doesn't seem to be nearly necessary, of course, and will be a huge overreaction, but he just loves militarized response to protests that he doesn't like. He doesn't, you'll recall, of course, being joined by Josh Hawley, who doesn't like militarized response to protests that he does like, until, of course, he finds out that the mob doesn't recognize members of Congress by their faces. They don't know who the hell is in there. They just figure everybody there is a useless bureaucrat who should be assaulted by the mob and possibly executed. So when the January 6th protesters, rioters, insurrectionists breached the Capitol, he ran away just as quickly as he could and as quickly as anybody else on the spot. Anyway, yes, Kevin Cruz reminding everybody, her historian, now that Tom Cotton and Josh Hawley are calling for the National Guard to be deployed to Colombia. It's worth remembering what happened when the National Guard was deployed to Kent State and Jackson State some 54 years ago, and he reminds us of it in, I guess, his own piece here. Let's make sure I get all these things singled out and marked for inclusion in the roundup. His Substack goes on to describe what happened, but most of you probably either remember or have heard the tale, read it in the history books, if you can believe it, of what happened at Kent State. I don't think we're going to rise to that level. I don't think it rises to that danger. But involving even the New York City Police Department is an overreaction, and almost always likely to result in something stupid happening and somebody getting hurt and suing the city and winning and costing the city several $1 million. So, we don't love to see this happening. You say that. We say that jokingly about other things. You love to see it. Not this one. Anyway, I don't think we need to have Kevin remind us of exactly what happened 50 years ago when they called out the National Guard against protesters. I don't think we're going to get to that point, but it is an interesting reminder that these weirdos still exist. Also on Blue Sky earlier today, the reaction of Brendan Nyhan was similar in pointing out bad things happen when you call out federalized troops to react to something that's one, that's a protest at all, and two, one that it just doesn't, from what I can see, rise to the level where you need anybody but campus security at this point. It would be, I think, an overreaction with respect to the actual students at the actual occupation and protest site. What else is happening beyond the gates? That's a little less clear. But of course, you can't suspend anybody for that. They're not among the student body, and they're just not subject to administration discipline. Anyway, it was, as I said, Brendan Nyhan who had brought up another issue, and this one I think I did grab and pocket in order for us to share. And let's see, did I not pocket this thing? He was basically warning once again, why it is extraordinarily dangerous to even allow or to have people like Tom Cotton, Josh Hawley, threatening these ideas of using troops to put down protests. The reminder here comes from a piece from earlier this month, April 8th, by Charlie Savage, always a good voice to add to the chorus warning you about such things. Ex-officials urge curbing presidential power to deploy troops on U.S. soil. Just another reminder, maybe we'll use this first segment for this reminder that this bipartisan group says that the point is not about Donald J. Trump's desire to invoke the Insurrection Act, but rather that current law gives all presidents too much unfettered power. Certainly, Charlie Savage has been on this beat for some time. But remembering that Cotton and Hawley are leaning on the Insurrection Act here. Now, there's just nothing even approaching January 6th levels going on anywhere. It's ridiculous to compare the two at this point. But, of course, on January 6th, had there been movement by Democratic officials, let's say, with such power as they had on Capitol Hill, let's say Nancy Pelosi had somehow urged the president to invoke the Insurrection Act, it would have been a mistake because, of course, Donald Trump was being urged by Jeffrey Clark to invoke the Insurrection Act, and Clark and others, and Proud Boys, etc. That was all actually part of their plan. We'll invoke the Insurrection Act against the people trying to stop our insurrection. So once again, one of those situations that the founders probably didn't imagine. We should empower the president to launch his own insurrection and then use the Insurrection Act against those who step in to try to put down the insurrection. Well, no, my insurrection is good and yours is bad. This is one of the dangers. So as Savage goes on to explain things, a bipartisan group of former senior national security and legal officials, including veterans of the Trump administration, believe it or not, are urging lawmakers to impose new limits on a president's power to deploy federal troops on domestic soil. This is the sort of thing, of course, that Donald Trump, who claims absolute presidential immunity, would just say, who cares to, right? It's an interesting thing to do, and it's probably the right procedure. It just doesn't stand up against somebody who declares themselves an authoritarian dictator. We've changed the Insurrection Act. You're no longer allowed to do this. Yes, I know, but I also think I should be able to break the law, so I'm going to do that. And I should have immunity for breaking the law, so see you later. But anyway, first step would be imposing new limits on a president's power to deploy federal troops on domestic soil. While it is generally illegal to use the U.S. military for domestic law enforcement purposes, don't tell that to Donald Trump, he doesn't care, a law called the Insurrection Act grants presidents emergency power to use troops to restore order when they decide a situation warrants it. And the idea, of course, again, was, only sensible people will make it all the way to the presidency. How do we know this? The genius of the Electoral College, of course. They'll only vote for sensible people because they're sensible people themselves. But in fact, they are, but in most cases, Republican and Democratic party leaders from the states. And not that sensible in the general scheme of things. But think about some of the people leading Republican parties in the states around the country and think, that's our protection against a lunatic demagogue being elected president, right? It isn't. Anyway, legal analysts for decades have proposed overhauling the act, which President George Bush, at the request of California's governor, invoked last in 1992 to suppress riots in Los Angeles. But the weakness of existing constraints has taken on new salience in the era of former President Donald J. Trump, who has vowed to unilaterally send troops into democratic cities. It does sound dangerous. If he wins the 2024 election. And by the way, he also, on the one hand, take him seriously, even if not literally, but also probably literally. But he did promise this in his 2016 election campaign too, and gee whiz, never got around to it. But I think, everyone's worried that the threat this time is they'll know how to do the dumb things that he wants done, and won't find themselves stymied by procedure next time. Many other proposed reforms to executive power after Mr. Trump's turbulent term were blocked by Republicans in Congress, who portrayed them as unnecessary partisan swipes. Why are you always taking aim at our Republican president's activities? Well, because they're routinely criminal and unconstitutional. Why, that's discriminatory. How dare you? Okay. And that's where we land and all these things. And of course, most newspapers then say, by golly, that's right. Except for Charlie Savage, I guess. And a few others, I am sure. Seeking to avoid that fate, the proponents of imposing new limits on the Insurrection Act said their point was not about Mr. Trump in particular, but rather that current law gives all presidents too much unfettered power. I've been down that road, by the way, when you propose either that there be limits or, if the limits have been broken, propose impeaching the perpetrator. The people come out, these guys usually, or people like them, come out and say, well, it's so partisan for you to propose impeaching the president because, of course, he's Republican and you're a Democrat. And you say, well, that's not about that. It's about too much unfettered power and the need to restrain it. But you look like it's tit for tat. So can't be done. Sorry. And look, now they find it's actually difficult to do when they're the ones who are concerned, as opposed to just me. Anyway, the set of principles unveiled on Monday, and again, this is earlier in April, and if I were smart like Rosalind McGregor, I would just change that in the reading. The set of principles unveiled earlier this month are ones that the group hopes lawmakers of both parties could endorse. Ex-lawmakers probably from the other party. Current? I don't know. Republican signatories included Courtney Simmons Elwood. So how about that for an exclamation point? Oh, I didn't realize Courtney Simmons Elwood was on board. Who? Well, as it turns out, general counsel of the CIA under Trump. So, surprising that person survived that long under Trump, but only because they waited until Biden was president to say this. Michael Mukasey, former federal judge who was attorney general in the Bush administration, again, sometimes we get surprised by how moderate Bush administration officials who did not at all seem moderate at the time, now seem in compared to Trump administration officials. And John Eisenberg, the top lawyer at the National Security Council in the Trump White House. Again, no jobs on the line for those guys right now. Mr. Eisenberg, who also worked on issues involving presidential emergency powers in the Bush administration after September 11th, said that he saw the project as a matter of good government. And by the way, just sort of pointing out here, since we were talking about the Israel-Gaza situation earlier, the shorthand of, they were working on, the limits of executive power, after post 9/11, after the September 11th attacks, which we very much use as shorthand in this country very often to, if not justify, then at least explain away, well, why did you do that incredibly psychotic thing? Well, we were threatened. There was national trauma. The whole country was frightened to death and immediately demanded some response. And you'll find that parallel in Israel about October 7th. And I mean, nobody thought our response was particularly sensible. Half the country here didn't think so either, and half the country there doesn't think the October 7th response has been sensible. And then, of course, worldwide reaction. It's similar, doesn't mean you don't want to try to avoid mistakes next time if you can, but it does probably help to at least to remind yourself, not everybody is seeing this from a distance and with the same, maybe allegedly clear eyes from that distance and from the safety of the United States, not always the same lens. Is all I'm saying here. Anyway, I just thought that was worth observing along the way. Maybe not. Anyway, back to the article. This is something of great importance regardless of what party you're in, because obviously it is an area that can be abused, Mr. Eisenberg said. Of course, I don't think Eisenberg would have been a tremendous ally in trying to tamp down on, say, warrantless surveillance and indefinite detention under the George W. Bush administration. That would have been viewed as extraordinarily partisan for some reason, even though the people being held indefinitely in Guantanamo weren't even Democrats, much less American Democrats, but somehow it was super partisan. Anyway, if the triggers, for example, are too vague, the risk is that it can be used in circumstances that do not really warrant it. So it is important to tighten up the language and reduce that risk. I'm sure there's going to be a mention in here somewhere of Jeffrey Clark saying, that's what the Insurrection Act is for, using it against people who are standing in the way of our auto golpe. Okay. Let's squeeze in another paragraph or two before taking our break. The recommendations include tightening the circumstances in which a president may invoke the Insurrection Act by eliminating vague, antiquated terms and clarifying that for domestic violence to warrant calling in federal troops, it must rise to a level that overwhelms local law enforcement. That, of course, nowhere near the case in and around Columbia University. The group also said there should be a statutory limit on how long such a deployment could last. That seems like a good idea, after which a president would have to remove troops unless Congress had voted to renew authority to continue the operation. It suggested a maximum of 30 days because, of course, a maximum of 30 days is totally irresistible to a autocratic dictator who will absolutely and may very well find justification in a Congress of his own party as well. We'll be right back. Hi everybody, it's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and patreon.com patreon.com is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's continue with Charlie Savage's probably annual warning about the dangers of the Insurrection Act. I feel like he's been on the beat anyway, if not always the Insurrection Act, then certainly the limits, or what should be the limits of executive power, for a long time. So, let's see. Some of those principles, the limitations previously described, align with aspects of legislation introduced in 2020 by Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut, a Democrat, of course, you all know. Congress did not pass that bill, but Mr. Blumenthal said in an interview last week, and this would be, again, early April, late March, that he was revising a version with Representative Jamie Raskin, Democrat of Maryland, which they hoped to unveil soon and attach to the annual must-pass defense bill. Don't think they managed to get that done. Right now, the law gives the president a blank check on the use of military power, which is a tool of tyranny, Mr. Blumenthal said. It gives the president virtually unchecked and unlimited power to use it against lawful dissent or other expression of opinion in ways that violate our basic rights. And so, whoever is president, not of Columbia University, but rather of the United States, Republican or Democrat, should be compelled to come to Congress after a specific defined period of time. Of course, I mean, think it through, right? The law compels the president to come to Congress, the chief of the executive branch hauled before the legislative branch to give a mandatory justification of the deployment of federal troops against domestic insurrection. Is that president going to show up if he doesn't feel like it? Probably not. Are they going to be able to enforce that law as against that president or any other president? Probably not. But they'll have it to point to? Yes. So will that be persuasive to people? Their people. Yes. Anyway, the principles were developed by a working group hosted by the American Law Institute. Oh, I didn't realize that it was a nonpartisan group. And so, of course, when they say you have to show up and a Republican president says no to a Democratic Congress, I am not going to show up, everyone will say, yeah, but don't you remember that these reforms were proposed by a bipartisan group? Either no, or just a lie, no they weren't, or I don't care, it doesn't matter. But anyway, this nonpartisan group was proposing improvements to the law and guided by Jack Goldsmith. We hear that name quite often, a Harvard Law School professor, so you have to listen to him. And former top Justice Department lawyer in the Bush administration, so you don't have to listen to him. And Bob Bauer, a New York University law professor and former White House counsel in the Obama administration. He is also President Biden's personal lawyer, but said in an interview that he was weighing in on the act only on his own behalf. It is noted parenthetically herein. Also, under the banner of the Institute, Mr. Goldsmith and Mr. Bauer, along with Mr. Mukasey and Ms. Elwood, advised a bipartisan group of lawmakers who in 2022 pushed through an update to another old law, the Electoral Count Act, that governs how Congress counts electoral college votes. Interesting. Similar group of people behind that reform, both on the legislative side and on the advisory side. I wanted to stop for a second there again and point out what might not be glaringly obvious on the surface, and yet, we understand the relationship there between that movement and that reform and this one. But just again to point out, this really would have astonished the founders, I suppose. Well, we need to address reforms in both simultaneously, more or less, because of the same reason. Wait a minute. The same reason? You want side-by-side reforms of, let me get this straight, the Insurrection Act and the Electoral Count Act are bound together in this argument? What happened 200 years hence? What's going on that the Insurrection Act and the Electoral Count Act have to be reformed together and that it needs to be done as a package and that they're bound together in this way? You're saying an insurrection was mounted, from within the Electoral College? Well, not exactly, although also yes. But yeah, how would they even have imagined? You mean an insurrection was mounted to stop the Electoral College from having its votes counted in Congress? Yes, and also some of those votes were fake. Not the ones that Congress was counting, but they forged some electoral votes, sent them to Congress, and then sent an insurrection to try to force the Congress to count the forged votes instead of the real votes. Wow. I would never have guessed that. I mean, I could see, if you sit down and think about it, I'm in the role of Thomas Jefferson here, I guess. I don't know. He wasn't one of the framers of the Constitution, but he was one of the founders. He would have been appalled by this, presumably, if he wasn't already appalled by his slave ownership. But anyway, pick a Federalist founder, if you like. But just thinking, if you had asked me which of these two things needed or would eventually need revision, I guess I probably would have thought maybe the Electoral Count Act before the Insurrection Act. But, I can imagine but putting the two of them together, or if you had said the Electoral Count Act and what other provision of federal law would be implicated by the first, serious constitutional crisis since whatever. I mean, we've had others along the way. Civil War, small constitutional crisis. I don't know. I don't know if they would have guessed that one. And it's just remarkable that we're kind of gliding past this idea of, oh yeah, and we also have to fix that very basic law as well. And there was an insurrection tied up with that. That's actually a pretty serious constitutional crisis. Anywho, in 2022, New York University's Brennan Center for Justice proposed changes to the Insurrection Act at the House committee investigating the Capitol riot, which it's a committee investigating an insurrection. Of course, you're going to tell them that you want an Insurrection Act change. It was the electoral count thing that would have been a surprise. Well, Mr. Blumenthal's 2020 bill and the Brennan Center's proposal both called for establishing a new court process assessing whether a president's invocation of the Insurrection Act was legally justified. The principles unveiled back in early April / late March say a reform bill should not include that step. What step are we talking about? New court process. Okay. Assessing the president's invocation of the Insurrection Act. In other words, making it judicially reviewable. But once again, that's a separation of powers problem and might not be solvable statutorily. They note instead that judicial review is likely already available under existing law, maybe, and that the Supreme Court has said judges should show deference to a president's determination that the conditions are met. So current law says, yes, there's a path to judicial review. It's just not a very good one because current precedent is, we're going to review it, but okay, I've reviewed it and it's all right because we just give deference to the executive branch on this. Professor Goldsmith, emphasizing that he was speaking only for himself, noted that during the push to reform the Electoral Count Act, an initial proposal included a provision centered on judicial review. It prompted Republican opposition and was essentially dropped. Adding such a provision to any Insurrection Act reform bill raised similar risks, he argued. In order to preserve their right to forge electoral votes and mount insurrections, unsurprisingly, the Republican Party at the moment opposes these reforms. How horribly partisan, one might say, as they did about the efforts to explore the impeachment of George W. Bush for his violations of the Constitution. Wow. While some of us viewed it as nonpartisan preservation of constitutional principles. It's odd that that would happen to us and not you, but okay. Anyway, after some demonstrations against police violence in 2020 degenerated into riots, Mr. Trump had an Insurrection Act order drafted to crack down on protesters in Washington. Military leaders resisted putting active duty troops on the streets, thankfully, and Mr. Trump did not sign the order, but had the cops come in and some unbadged federal agent weirdos came in and cracked some heads while hiding their identities as well. So we got pretty close. But as the presumptive Republican nominee in the 2024 election, Trump has raised anew the prospect of using federal troops on American soil. His top immigration policy advisor has suggested that his administration would invoke the act to use soldiers as immigration agents near the border. And at a rally in Iowa last year, Trump said he would unilaterally send troops into the streets of Democratic-run cities, which is, of course, a vast expansion even on the Stephen Miller doctrine, and a dangerous admission of interest in assuming power as an autocratic dictator. You look at any Democrat-run state, and it's just not the same. It doesn't work, Mr. Trump said, calling cities like New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, and San Francisco crime dens, where he owns real estate. We cannot let it happen any longer, and one of the things I'll do, which you won't do because he's very dumb and very lazy, but it's bad to threaten it, Because you're not supposed to be involved in that. You just have to be asked by the governor or the mayor to come in. Next time, I'm not waiting. So, yeah, just a reminder that, we'll revise the law and tighten up the restrictions. Well, those lame restrictions that we have now are of no interest to him. Anyway, the group endorsing an overhaul of the Insurrection Act also includes 3 retired top military lawyers: Brigadier General Mark Martins, the former chief prosecutor of the Guantanamo Military Commissions; Vice Admiral James Crawford, a former top legal advisor to the Joint Chiefs of Staff; and Vice Admiral Bruce McDonald, a former top naval judge advocate general. It also included 2 former Democratic national security lawyers from the Obama administration: Mary DeRosa, a former National Security Council legal advisor, and Jay Johnson, a former Pentagon General Counsel and Homeland Security Secretary. So, there you have it, along with commentary. It's a dangerous situation. We should keep it in mind. And just how, just how close to the edge it will come to to put Donald Trump back in charge, or to allow him to take charge again. And remember, none of this makes any difference to him, so why should the laws about who is and isn't elected president make any difference to him? You don't want to do anything to empower these weirdos, and Tom Cotton and Josh Hawley should be answered vociferously, let's say, at the very least, in these proposals. And this is just at least the second time. Cotton did this in response to Black Lives Matter protests, and now he does it in response to Palestinian protest. So, just par for the course for him. Okay, a couple of other things happening as well. I kind of would like to keep an eye on, see if anybody is reporting anything weird happening at the Trump trial this morning. But related, I guess, just to segue off of this and into other areas, we could take a look at this piece here from, is it Steve Bannon at MSNBC? Yeah, at the Maddow blog. It's taking its sweet time loading, but a reminder of something I put aside yesterday and didn't read, but apparently Trump was also complaining both about he wanted to get involved in complaining about the Columbia thing so he could get on the Insurrection Act bandwagon again, I'm sure. And, of course, he just has this general disdain for protesters that he doesn't like. But he was saying that, over at Columbia, they're all the crazy, they're occupying and they're threatening people, that we can't stand for this and they should go in there and they should crack heads. Meanwhile, over here near my trial, the police have clamped down so terribly on protesters who were supposed to come out in the millions to support me that there's nobody around. I came to court today and there was nobody cheering for me. And apparently he seems stunned by this. Another one of his delusions. He really thought there was going to be massive protests outside the courthouse in support. Free Donald Trump. But there haven't been any. Now, he was blaming that on the security around the courtroom, and that they had, imposed these stupid First Amendment zones far away from what's ever actually happening. He wanted the protests to be on the courthouse steps, and he wanted to have to make his way through an adoring throng to get to his courtroom. But, the reality is, 1, they were never going to allow that, and 2, it was never going to materialize. There's not that many people in Manhattan who actually support Trump, and about 0 of the Trump supporters in the country are willing to go to Manhattan as well. There was a couple of days ago, I think, some interesting, person on the street interviews from reporters who were speaking to the few Trump supporters who had made their way to the environs of the courthouse to protest, who were not from Manhattan themselves, who actually expressed some astonishment. I was wondering if they were going to ask them about this. Are you surprised, now that you're here, that Manhattan has not been burned to the ground by Black Lives Matter protesters? And they actually did say, yeah, I kind of thought that this place would be more sort of wasteland combat zone. But But as it turns out, there's coffee shops and bakeries all over the place and pleasant places with ferns to sit down and have lunch. And they clean up the sidewalks every morning and everything. So I don't know what to make of it. Have you considered the fact that the president you support, who's on trial here today, is a total liar and idiot? No, I had not considered that. Anyway, Steve Bannon commenting on Trump's bubble being burst by there not being protesters here. In New York, Trump looks for masked protests that still don't exist. Donald Trump wanted a circus, and that's a quote, circus, to accompany his trial, but the mass protests he envisioned failed to materialize again. It's worth appreciating why, and let's appreciate it. Why don't we? A few days before the jury selection process began in Trump's criminal trial in New York, the former president's political operations sent out a message that appeared designed to generate some excitement and some possible campaign contributions. That's what they were actually interested in. The headline read, 72 hours until all hell breaks loose, except, no hell broke loose at all. Maybe inside the courtroom while he was sleeping, some small amount, let's say, of hell, or what smelled like hell, did in fact break loose, to be clear. 3 days later, all hell did not break loose. Not all hell, just a limited amount of hell. As the proceedings got underway, there was a smattering, that's a quote and a link here, of people who showed up to express their support for the Republican, that's Trump. But overall, the protest was a dud. Of course, it was at least possible that the jury selection process wasn't a compelling hook for the suspected felons' diehard fans. Maybe this week, as the trial begins in earnest, Trump's followers would show up in large numbers. The defendant certainly seemed eager to raise that possibility. In a message he published to his social media platform yesterday morning, a couple days ago, I'm sure, the presumptive GOP nominee wrote, in all caps apparently, "Go out and peacefully protest. Rally behind MAGA. Save our country." The New York Times reported that Trump was evidently not happy when few followed his directive, ignoring the fact that, quote, he wanted a circus to accompany his trial. Another pull quote here from the New York Times, the scene that confronted him as he approached the dingy courthouse. And it's not a beautiful courthouse, and it's not a beautiful courtroom, by the way. Architecture should be beautiful. He has a point there in that one. And I think it angers him that he's being tried in a dump. I mean, it's an okay courthouse and an okay courtroom. It's just nothing fancy. And I guess he figured, well, the courtroom where they try me is going to have mahogany paneling and beautiful chandeliers and, et cetera, et cetera. And it doesn't. And I think that bothers him, which is funny. Anyway, the scene that confronted him as he approached the dingy courthouse at 100 Center Street was underwhelming. Across the street at Collect Pond Park. Is that how you collect pond? Like a collection pond? That's delicious. All right. Well, the designated site for protesters during the raid, unless it's somehow, named after it's got corporate naming rights. The Collect Company owns this park. I don't know. I'm not familiar with the area. Many of you probably are, but that was the designated site for protesters during the trial. And there, only a handful of Trump supporters had gathered, and the number would not grow much throughout the morning. The streets around the courthouse on Monday were chaos-free, well-patrolled, and relatively quiet. That should have, resulted in praise for the police, but apparently not. The article added that there were some Trump supporters gathered in the park across from the courthouse, but they were outnumbered by Trump detractors. To the chagrin of the former president, this keeps happening. Circling back to our recent coverage, as Trump's post-defeat legal woes intensified, his rhetoric about his supporters taking to the streets grew louder. In January 2022, for example, amidst speculation about possible indictments, the Republican said that at a rally, that if he were to face charges, "I hope we're going to have in this country the biggest protests we ever had." Or none. In September 2022, Trump delivered a related ominous message saying that if he were indicted, the United States would face problems, the likes of which perhaps we've never seen. This does remind me, at this point, Thinking back, there certainly were people, like supposedly serious people, writing op-eds in newspapers saying, maybe it's just best that we not do. It's going to be chaos and protest, and his followers are promising that there's going to be unrest, and it's just not worth doing. What are we going to gain by this? Maybe we just shouldn't do it. And so it's important to remember that people thought that, and the reality is nothing. Bupkis, as we might say, now in the middle of Passover, we'll make it overtly Jewish. Bupkis from these protesters. Could it change? It could. I'm just reminding you that he said apocalypse and there was crickets. So maybe we should take that into account. The big predictions turned into directives last year. In March of 2023, as the former president prepared for an indictment in New York, he turned to a social media platform writing, all caps again, "Protest! Take our nation back!" In case that was too subtle, Trump added a few hours later, "It's time!" 3 exclamation points. "We just can't allow this anymore. We must save America. Protest, protest, protest." And there was nothing. Around the same time, the Republican derided the Republican. That's interesting. That's his way. It's a good disarming reference to Trump. The Republican derided talk of peaceful demonstrations, interestingly, while suggesting that if he were indicted in New York, it might cause, quote, "potential death and destruction," unquote. That could be catastrophic for our country. Death and destruction. From 3 lunatics with Trump flags at a collection pond across the street. But, these people get excited about protest, even if it is just 3 people. Look, they're ready to have the National Guard come and arrest or kill, who knows, students at this point. Though it seemed as if Trump envisioned mass groups of red-capped followers taking to the streets, those calls were largely ignored. Some supporters turned out in Manhattan around the time of his first arrest, but the gatherings were, by any fair measure, underwhelming duds. After his classified documents scandal led to his second indictment, the former president, called his followers to rally behind him. Trump wrote, all caps again, "See you in Miami on Tuesday," and again 3 exclamation points, on his social media platform, but the numbers were, again, small, like his fingers. Local law enforcement was prepared for crowds of up to 50,000 people. Actual crowd, closer to 500. 2 months later, in fact, at a Trump arraignment, another one, in Washington, D.C., a handful of his supporters showed up to register their dissatisfaction. Yesterday, a couple days ago, the turnout was, once again, largely a joke. So much for protest, protest, protest. As for why exactly these demonstrations have failed to materialize, there are plenty of competing explanations, starting with the fact that the Justice Department's extensive prosecutions of January 6th rioters have not gone unnoticed among the former president's most ardent backers. But I'm reminded of an analysis by my MSNBC colleague Zishan Alim, who wrote last year, it may have to do with post-January 6th weariness of getting in trouble if a pro-Trump protest spirals out of control. Perhaps conspiracy theories about the government laying traps for peaceful protesters scared them out of showing up. Maybe Trump finally has exhausted his base with his constant hysteria. Whatever the reasons may be, Trump is looking weak, and nothing he hates more than looking weak. So good. It's been a good week for his looking weak. All right, let's see. Other things that I have put aside here, just checking in on, process stuff that we should get on the record before we speak to Joan. All right, just making sure we're covering our bases here. But while we're still on the Trump thing, I thought I might also add some Amanda Marcotte to the mix, because it's always wise to do so. And she looking at the courtroom antics, the lack of protest, etc., and drawing a similar conclusion. And this one is fun, and you should enjoy it while he's embroiled in this trial. Trump's humiliation deepens. In court, he can't hide from his tabloid roots. Slightly different and interesting take on his courtroom humiliation. I definitely have been enjoying the fact that he knows and everybody else knows he's not in charge in that room. It's one of the few places where they've been able to make him acknowledge that he's not running the show. If there's a hell, Trump's punishment would be a trial where people tell the truth about him all day. That's the subheader on this piece, and Amanda begins, while it falls far short of the punishment he deserves, there was no small amount of satisfaction from reports that Donald Trump had to spend much of the first week of his first criminal trial quietly taking it as mean tweets about him were read aloud in court for hours at a time. Potential jurors in his New York hush money trial, people are, resisting that framing, but okay, were interviewed to determine if they could judge Trump with an open mind. In the process, both past social media posts and in-the-moment honest opinions were made public. Trump is such a famous narcissist, he literally has a woman who follows him around with a wireless printer to keep him in a steady supply of online praise. We mentioned this new aid yesterday. I'm going to click the link so I can get you the name again. Natalie Harp is her name. And I don't know whether it was Greg and I just discussing it during one of the breaks or not. But yes, he does actually have such a person. Yes, she did attempt to spend the entirety of the trial seated directly or just a row or two behind him at the defense table so she could keep him supplied with a steady stream of printed out positive articles, but they booted her to the back and said, get the F out of here. Anyway, she is, by the way, a former One America News host and apparently also was a speaker at, while she was a One America News host, at the Republican National Convention held at the White House, amazingly enough, in the middle of the COVID pandemic. Just in case you were inclined to throw back to those days when I applied on behalf of Daily Kos to get credentialed at the congressional press galleries, and of course was rejected because Daily Kos was too political an operation. Here, One America News, who is credentialed, and I think still is credentialed at the congressional press galleries, were speaking at the Republican National Convention held at the White House, and now, of course, have moved on to printing out nice things about the president to hand him while he is on trial for fraud. Okay. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Let's get through the rest of Amanda Marcotte's article. I'll jump back now that we have identified Natalie Harp as the person she mentioned here with the following Trump around with a wireless printer to keep him in a steady supply of online praise. Well, hearing what people outside of the paid shills have to say was, all reports suggest, very upsetting for the former president. He glowered and eventually tried to leave the courtroom so quickly that he had to be told to sit down by the judge. The jury is now impaneled and no longer will be asked to talk about past social media posts calling Trump dumb as blank, let's say, or dumb as yes. But as Monday's trial opening suggested, this trial is set to put Trump's fragile ego through a lengthy battering. It's hard to believe it, considering his ridiculous hair, hideous makeup, and comically oversized suits. But by all accounts, Trump seems to actually believe he cuts an impressive figure. He famously spent decades longing to be included in the ranks of Manhattan's social elite, imagining he had a classiness that they were simply failing to see. As Elizabeth Spears of the New York Times wrote last week, the rich and powerful sometimes invited him to their parties, but behind his back they laughed at his coarse methods and his tacky aesthetic. But of course, we are reminded that's part of his appeal to people in the rest of the country who, had they been invited to the parties of the rich and powerful, I'm sure worried that they too would be laughed at for their coarse methods and tacky aesthetic. Alas, getting elected president allowed Trump to finally swaddle himself in the pomp that allows him to successfully delude himself into believing he has an air of dignified stature. Never mind, I would add, what his air actually really is like. During his time in the White House, of course, he enjoyed the state dinners. Well, all dinners, really, he enjoyed. But the state dinners and other grand ceremonies meant to imbue the office with a solemn authority, although it was a huge mistake to go and visit the royal family in England, where he then had to put on white tie and tails and look like, some sort of, the caricature of the opera singer from Bugs Bunny, quite honestly. But anyway, granted, Trump's clownishness just made all of that seem ridiculous to those looking on, but his attempted stern-faced expressions, we all love his blue steel, of course, and chin-up pride showed that he really did seem to feel he was finally being taken for the great man he wished himself to be. Even after leaving the White House, Trump went to great lengths to keep himself in this elevated atmosphere. Unfortunately, he gets a lot of help keeping up the illusion of majesty. The presence of Secret Service protection allows him to travel with a pricey black car entourage at the taxpayer's expense. He also sees a steady stream of Republican politicians visit Mar-a-Lago, allowing Trump to play the part of a king greeting supplicants who kiss the ring. While the outcome of the trial remains weeks away, the process of being a criminal defendant has already stripped Trump of most of the trappings he uses to prop up his delusions of nobility. He has to sit still and do what he's told, which he whines about ad nauseum when he's outside of court. He keeps reportedly falling asleep, and believable rumors, links here, suggest the smell of him is hard to bear. I wonder what those rumors are about. Anyway, let's see. And in addition to the word of his emanations, I guess, there's also this clip from Jesse Waters on Fox News saying Trump has been on the move his whole life. Golf, rallies, movement, action, sunlight, fresh air, freedom. This isn't lawfare. This is torture. They're making a 77-year-old man sit in a room for 8 hours straight, 4 days a week, which honestly is what a lot of 77-year-old men do by choice. And honestly, he would be doing as well. Golf, yes, but also 8 hours of TV, that's actually happening. That was always his real schedule. Executive time. On Monday, the humiliations continued to pile on Trump with opening arguments and the first witnesses, former National Enquirer publisher David Pecker. Even in this truncated day of court, Monday, yesterday, the picture painted of Trump was not the regal leader of his fantasies, but who he actually is, a sleazy poseur who belongs to the world of trashy tabloids and scheming hucksters. The whole thing is a harsh reminder to his face, his horrible basketball-colored face, that Trump is more suited to wallowing in the gutter than sitting on a throne, unless, of course, you mean a toilet. The prosecutor, Matthew Colangelo, did not hold back from the salacious details in describing the alleged crimes that led to Trump sitting at the defendant's table: the extramarital sex, the hush money payments, the alleged out-of-wedlock child, is that right? The conspiracy with the National Enquirer to pay women off in a practice with the tawdry name catch and kill. He spoke of Trump as such a miscreant that he required a full-time fixer to take care of problems. He read aloud the various National Enquirer headlines crafted to help Trump, a reminder that Trump's natural home is in the most prurient gossip rags. And of course, Colangelo spoke of Trump's crude bragging on the infamous Access Hollywood tape about how he likes to sexually assault women. Regardless of the air quality around his desk, defense attorney Todd Blanche had a stinky job on Monday, trying to portray Trump as somehow above the shady people he surrounds himself with. Blanche sanctimoniously called Trump President Trump, as if saying it makes it true. He tried to humanize his glowering orange lump of a client with, he's a husband, he's a father, and a person just like you and just like me. In contrast, Blanche attempted to discredit Michael Cohen, the aforementioned fixer, who has already served time for his role in this conspiracy, by calling Cohen a criminal. And as I understand it, there were several objections to his opening remarks yesterday as well, which is a pretty unusual thing for a seasoned attorney to have to endure. But there are kind of strict rules and guidelines about what you can and can't say during opening arguments because none of the evidence has been presented. You're not supposed to make conclusory statements like that or say things that are as yet unsupported by evidence. You can say the evidence is going to show those things, but you're not supposed to assert them as facts. And when you do, it draws an objection, and it's embarrassing. It's a line you're just not supposed to cross. And I have a feeling that Trump may have demanded that his counsel cross it, knowing that there would be objections, but he's probably thinking, I'm sunk with this jury anyway. Anyway, it all may work, of course. You have to note that as a possibility. Jurors are people, and people can be bamboozled, as Trump's entire career demonstrates. But Blanche's argument just doesn't make any sense. If Trump is such an upstanding citizen, then why would he need someone like Cohen to commit crimes on his behalf? Nor is Trump just like you, unless you, ordinary person, do so many terrible things on a regular basis that you literally need a full-time fixer to clean up your messes. Most of us go our entire lives without once needing a tabloid magazine to cover up our sad-sounding adultery. As Colangelo's opening statement showed, Trump practically kept the National Enquirer on retainer. Pecker only spent about 20 minutes on the stand before the judge called recess for the day, but in that brief time, the jury got another glimpse into the vulgar environments that are Trump's natural home. Pecker described his business as a checkbook journalism and agreed with Colangelo that he traffics in juicy stories. That is why the location of the trial in New York City matters so much. Tabloids are ubiquitous in the city, which means the typical New Yorker is quite aware of how they function and why they're not considered as respectable as traditional papers. Despite Trump trying to tell reporters this trial is going very well, reports from inside the courtroom are that he was seething. No surprise there. Prior to this, Trump spent all day, every day, inside a bubble, surrounded by flatterers and sycophants, always ready to tell him that he's a mighty man who definitely doesn't weigh an ounce over 215 pounds and wins every golf game with ease. Now he's spending his days in a dingy courtroom, staying silent while other people talk about his real self, a pathetic figure who pressures reluctant women into sex and then runs to his seedy friends and barrel-scraping employees to bail him out of trouble. If there was a hell, Trump's punishment would be to look into a mirror for all eternity. Having to hear people tell the truth about him for hours a day is as close as we're going to get on the mortal plane. Maybe so. All right. Just wanted to update you on, the fact that these reports exist. They're fun and interesting to read. Of course, we should probably be preparing to talk to Joan McCarter about some more substantive things, and perhaps we can now prepare the ground for that. Here's an interesting story that, it's not on the congressional radar, but again, it's substantive and policy related. And an interesting comeuppance as well. Just, am I going to be able to read this whole thing or not? It's in the Orlando Sentinel, and I'm not certain whether we're going to have access to it or not. Anna Ceballos for the Miami Herald. Let me scroll down and see if if the full article is in fact available. I think so. How lucky for us. Okay, thank you, Orlando Sentinel. Let's see. So here's the upshot of it all. You'll remember this. Remember when both Greg Abbott and Ron DeSantis were staging their latest stunt on immigration to try to, I guess, bolster their prospects for president. Abbott wasn't running at the time. DeSantis was, but I'm sure Abbott was thinking about running again in the future. And it was the shuttling migrants around and then ultimately flying them to Martha's Vineyard, right? DeSantis thought that was such a brilliant play. I'll dump them in this liberal bastion. Which one isn't that liberal a bastion? And two, I guess it was supposed to upset liberal vacationers. who go there during the summer. But also, it was supposed to expose the hypocrisy of northern liberals who say that they're open to immigration and open to welcoming migrants. And, well, fine, we're not, so let them have them. Although these migrants, of course, had not arrived in Florida, and he didn't ship any of the people who who do arrive in Florida. They don't get shipped to Martha's Vineyard because they are largely Cubans, and he needs to cultivate the Cuban community because they vote Republican. I don't know why, but they do. But so he imported some migrants from Texas and then flew them to Martha's Vineyard to prove his point. It backfired, and of course the locals in Martha's Vineyard said, well, it's an unfortunate situation, but it's not their fault. We'll help take care of them after all, which is exactly what Ron DeSantis was pretty sure they wouldn't do, so he could point at them and say, hypocrites. Well, anyway, something new has developed here. Those migrants that were flown to Martha's Vineyard by DeSantis, guess what's happening? They're getting visas. Why are they getting visas? Well, they're getting special visas, a lawyer says, and guess what kind of visas they're getting? Some 49 of the migrants, or some of the 49 migrants flown to Martha's Vineyard by Governor Ron DeSantis' administration are now able to work legally in the United States and have temporary protections from deportation because they are considered victims of a potential crime, their attorney says. And guess what the crime is? That's right. It's Ron DeSantis' stunt. The migrants are eligible for protection because they applied for a special kind of visa meant for crime victims who are helping law enforcement investigate suspected criminal activity. They applied for what are known as U visas, like the letter U. U visas last year after they said they had been tricked into taking charter flights from San Antonio, Texas, to, eventually, the Massachusetts island with false promises of jobs and other aid, said Rachel Self, an attorney for the migrants. Of course, I'm sure that DeSantis' defense will say, but now they are getting jobs, so we did promise them jobs and then they got them, so we weren't lying. Well, I don't know if it's going to work that way. But how do you like that? People said at the time, hey, this is illegal. Well, so what? I'm doing it anyway. I'm a brash, whatever the hell you want. Anyway, a brash doer. I don't talk, I don't chatter and waste time debating. I just go do. Make things happen. We'll make crimes happen. Yeah. And guess what? One, you may never face justice for your crimes, but you are facing an interesting comeuppance. The people that you thought, A, would be rejected by the locals in Martha's Vineyard weren't. B, the people you thought were wanted eventually to be deported as criminals themselves are instead witnesses against you for your crimes and as a result get to stay and work in the United States. What a dummy. He spent all of that Florida money on the big stunt to demonstrate that these guys should be deported, only to land them with visas and with asylum in the United States. The exact opposite of his point. But at least they're in Martha's Vineyard. Yeah, but they can also move on from there and work elsewhere because they've got the permits that you were going to deny them. Anyway, the migrant flight program was, of course, designed to remove, quote, unauthorized aliens from Florida, which they weren't in Florida to begin with, but whatever. But critics, including immigration advocacy groups, have pointed out that the migrants had legal status in the United States as asylum seekers already, by the way, and that they were found in Texas, not Florida. So I guess DeSantis could say, well, it wasn't me. I didn't give them visas. They were eventually going to have legal status anyway because they are asylum seekers. But that's not the way he sold the program, of course. DeSantis has maintained the flights were conducted lawfully, but I guess not. And that migrants boarded the flights voluntarily, but I guess not. Yet the recruitment tactics used in the first of the governor's migrant relocation program have resulted in a criminal investigation by the Bexar County Sheriff in Texas and a federal lawsuit by some of the migrants who have claimed that they were deceived by the state. Now, some of those migrants have been granted U visas, which are set aside for victims of certain crimes who have suffered mental or physical abuse and are helpful to law enforcement or government officials in the investigation or prosecution of criminal activity, according to U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. They can eventually lead to permanent lawful status in the United States. The migrants, who were from Venezuela and Peru, were eligible to apply for the visas after Bexar County Sheriff Javier Salazar, a Democrat, by the way, certified that they were victims of a crime. There's no difference between the two parties. After waiting for more than a year, some migrants earlier this month received bona fide determinations in their U visa petition, a status that allows them to obtain temporary work permits and protects them from deportation until their visa becomes available, Self said. It was not immediately clear how many migrants had received that status from the federal government. Congress only allows the federal government to issue 10,000 such visas in any year. The bona fide determination gives the migrants targeted by the state of Florida temporary protections from deportation while they wait for the visa. DeSantis' office did not immediately respond to a request for comment. Since last June, there have been no updates on the criminal investigation in Texas. That's too bad. But by the way, I don't wait, I just do. I'm a man of action. Can we have some comment? No response. At that time, Salazar recommended that the district attorney in Bexar County bring criminal charges over alleged deceptive tactics used by the state to lure migrants onto the flights. Specifically, Salazar recommended both felony and misdemeanor charges of unlawful restraint that have the potential of snaring some of those who helped DeSantis carry out the flights. The district attorney has not yet announced any action on the case. That's too bad. The Bexar County DA's inaction on this matter is concerning and cannot be understated, Self said in a statement to the Herald/Times, the Miami Herald, and I don't know what the other Times, but on Monday. Okay, whose Times is it that we can combine with the Miami Herald in this? Okay, well, Floridians, you can tell me, and I can neglect to make that announcement at some future point. All right, I just thought that was an interesting twist here. Now, I guess moving over to more congressionally related commentary and items that I had to share with you. I think somewhere here is parked a Blue Sky post. Yes, here it is. I thought this was an interesting summation of things here. Sahil Kapoor speaking about the legislative work of the past couple of days. And as I understand it, the Senate cut its recess short and came back to deal with the aid packages for Ukraine and Israel and Taiwan. Don't forget Taiwan. And various others, so that they could be quickly moved on to the president for signature. And Sahil Kapoor summarizing the full length, I guess, of the chronology here, that he puts in 7 quick bullet points here. 1, numbered bullet points. Republicans say no foreign aid without border security. Right? So it's a confrontation right away. We're not going to allow for Ukraine aid or Israel aid or any other aid without a border security measure. Democrats, number 2, Democrats say nope. 3, Republicans say, well, then no aid. 4, D's cave. And there are lots of doomsaying and gloom and upset about that at the time, I'm sure. D's cave and cut a deal for tougher border laws with Lankford and McConnell. So that's the low point of all this. But interesting. Guess who comes to the rescue? In point number 5, Trump, who's on trial, by the way, and smells terrible. Trump tells Republicans in the House anyway, and in did the Senate didn't kill it, but at any rate, he tells Republicans in Congress, both in the House and in the Senate, to vote against it. Trump tells them kill it. Why does he tell them kill it? This is a deal reached with Republicans after a Democratic cave in Congress, and all Democratic rank and file grassroots supporters disappointed by this whole thing and how we always cave on this. And I mean, they may not have had this planned. I don't think they could have had it planned this way, but rescued nonetheless somehow by Trump, who says there can be no democratic successes, nothing that can be pointed to as a win, or just even a bill signed into law, whether the rank and file think of it as a win or not, by Biden, or else. That's all, I won't be elected if he looks like he can accomplish things. So kill it. So Step 6, Republicans kill it. And then what ends up happening? Well, okay, no foreign aid without border security. Okay, here's the border security. No, we don't want the border security. Okay, but still we have this problem. Are you going to stand in the way of aid to Ukraine? Now, the majority of Republicans in the House did try to stand in the way of aid to Ukraine, but did it happen? Did it work? No, it didn't, because step 7 is Republicans pass foreign aid without border security. Now, that might be a little bit misleading. Republicans didn't really pass the foreign aid without the border security. The majority of Republicans in the House voted against that, but some Republicans did do that. And maybe before I forget, I should put this on the record. Jeremy Freiberger sent me a note that really should be shared with Greg tomorrow, and I'll try and remember to share it with him because it was prompted by Greg's remarking yesterday that the House Republicans' recent vote on Ukraine aid, 112 no votes to 101 yay votes, with one voting present, by the way, will be used, or that Greg said, well, that'll be used for ads in every swing district. Put another way, he says, all 210 Democrats who were present and voted to support Ukraine, Europe, democracy, and freedom, while more than half of Republicans, 52.3% of Republicans in the House, voted to support Putin, Russia, and its murderous dictatorship. Good point. But over the weekend, Jeremy says, I had looked up the House vote to see just how each Republican voted. Meanwhile, although I don't claim to be familiar with every House Republican, I'm at least somewhat aware of most of them, and I'm quite aware of who sits in swing districts. Not surprisingly, all but one House Republican currently occupying what could be considered a swing seat voted yes, yay actually, but yes on the foreign aid. So apparently that was the memo, right? Okay, we're going to lose Republican votes in this, but if you're sitting in a swing district, you're going to want to vote yes for this aid. The only one who voted no, who's in something even remotely considered swingy, was Eli Crane. And then parenthetically, it says here, after Arizona 2 was gerrymandered prior to 2022 to favor the GOP, Crane ousted incumbent Democrat Tom O'Halloran. To me, Jeremy says, Crane has always come across as a little more than a low-intelligence, extreme, ex-military gun nut. Perhaps he simply didn't understand the memo that instructed swing district goppers to vote yay. On the other hand, he did win in 2022 by almost 7 points. So that will be of interest, of course. And what defines a swing district may change as well, you know. More surprising things have happened recently, like the abortion referenda in some red states passing overwhelmingly. And Jeremy does agree in a follow-up note. Yeah, that is true. The conditions are as favorable to Democrats as we've seen in a long time. And to the extent that people worry and wring their hands and say doom and gloom, well, there's real reason to believe that there will be some astonishing results. I don't know whether it translates into reversing red seats or gerrymandered seats anywhere, but we will see. But yeah, that's actually a good side note, right? So there was this big split among the Republicans, and yes, the majority of them voted no on the aid, but the majority of them, well, those who did are those who sit in very red, very heavily Republican, very heavily gerrymandered seats. So that was probably to be expected, and they did do that. And so the vision of using this against Republicans in swing districts may not come to fruition. But that's only if you follow, like, you know, the actual logic of things. It's not necessarily the case that these won't be used this way. You will be able to say, I mean, the defense to it might be that the incumbent says, I'm being charged with having voted no on these things and being pro-Putin, but I voted yes on these things. Well, okay. But you remaining in your seat only empowers the 112 idiots who vote no and do so with impunity. And if we transfer the leadership of Congress into Democratic hands, bills like this won't come up, where the 112 lunatics will be able to empower themselves to attempt even a pro-Putin foreign policy. That just won't happen anymore. If we get rid of you, you're not maybe necessarily directly to blame, but only because you're trying to dodge responsibility. If you had been able to vote pro-Putin, who knows what you might have done. But the point is that your leadership serves up pro-Putin policy all the time. And if we get rid of you, which is easier to do because you're in a swing district, we will be able to neuter them. That can be the message. That should work pretty well. Well, all right. Very nearly at the break here. In fact, the music starts anyway. And when we come back, we're in our fourth segment. We'll see if Joan McCarter is available and pleased to join us in the next segment and catch us up on what's happening, because weird things are happening. They're all supposed to be on recess this week, but the Senate came back, which is just sort of interesting and weird, and you wouldn't see it happening under Republican leadership, I'm sure. Democratic leadership, well, there it is. Okay, we'll be right back.
Sup fam, it's your boy Darwin, aka Darwin_Darko, aka the most reasonable man in America, aka KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
Okay, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We are joined by Joan McCarter, who is stricken by the plague of the frogs at the moment. It's very timely. But yeah, waking up, it's a little earlier out where you are, so I appreciate your day starts early, but I appreciate that you would divert attention our way. Plenty
happily,
happening.
Kagro.
Yes, happily. Why, thank you. Okay. It's always fun to talk about what's going on with you, so hopefully it's enjoyable for you as much as it is for us. Unusual situation. I understand the Senate cut their recess short to come back and take care of business. It's a weird thing. It must only happen when, Democrats run the place, I guess. Otherwise they'd be off on vacation.
Yes.
I guess,
if you take 2 weeks for Easter,
yeah,
taking a week for Passover is not totally unreasonable.
No. And of course, it's rarely vacation, of course, as we always try to point out for those guys, but still, not something they give up easily.
I don't know.
Oh, okay.
I don't know how much district work a lot of these folks do, to tell you the truth. I know that my two senators,
yeah, maybe traditionally it was true.
Merkley and Wyden, do a lot.
Okay.
They do an awful lot. The rest of them, I'm not so sure.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, well, that's true. It was always traditionally the case, but we do find every once in a while when they report on these things that modern Republicans in particular tend to, I guess they've sort of found out somewhere along the line that they can get away without doing a lot of constituent outreach. And you very often see reports about random Republicans when they're running again that people point out that person hasn't had a town hall meeting or a district event in the 2 years they've been in Congress. Not one. And apparently that's not in the instructions anywhere, and or they don't care. But those who take government, I guess if you don't take governance seriously, you're not going to take constituent service seriously. All right. Well, anyway, the Senate's back. They took care of clearing the foreign aid bills for Biden's signature that were passed to them at the end of last week. The House wants to keep their recess, and I guess they have, but they got their work done, believe it or not. Maybe that too is because the place is being run by Democrats, even though it doesn't say so on the nameplates.
Apparently, it was Johnson getting a classified briefing. Mm-hmm. That was really, really scary.
Oh.
Apparently, that's what tipped the edge, a recognition of reality.
Okay. What? That's...
yeah.
All right. I'll take it. He's not always the most reality-based guy, but they must have scared him good. Do we know, was it a Ukraine assessment that scared him or some other? Okay.
Yes. In the larger scope of Russia's intent, as far as I have read.
Okay. Well, it
was a scary thing. It is a scary thing. You know,
you've got
all of Eastern Europe looking over their shoulder.
The
Biden administration apparently has stuff just ready to send.
Okay.
The moment Biden signs the bill, it's going in. So.
All right. Well, they've had a long enough time to prepare for it, so I'm sure they're raring to go. But yeah, it was interesting. I read through the Sahil Kapoor chronology. The basic chronology of how it happened. Yeah. And it kind of was like that. It's just Trump sort of went in there and blew up the situation, rather selfishly, just saying, I will have a harder time, in my judgment, running for president against Biden if it looks like he's succeeded. So kill this package. And all it ended up doing was making it easier to, okay, well, in that case, we'll pass the foreign aid without the thing that you were holding it hostage for. Bye.
Yeah. And now Lindsey Graham is giving Trump credit for the breakthrough.
Well,
in an Axios story, Graham credited Trump for getting the aid to the finish line, across the finish line. His idea of making some aid alone, not a grant, was really the turning point in the whole process, he told Axios.
I see. Well, yeah, that's a different area of it. But I was thinking like he was going to say, well, he's in a statesmanlike way dropped the demands for a border security portion because it was so important to get that. No, it wasn't even that. It was his idea to turn it into loans. He did mention that. Of course, it was someone else's idea. Yeah, well, we'll turn it into loans like the payroll protection program loans. Wink, here's some money as a loan. Okay. Well, that's an interesting spin. I don't know if anybody is going to believe that Trump was secretly running foreign policy from inside a criminal courtroom, but it's possible. And I mean, at what point was he giving those secret instructions? Was he sleeping or when he was farting? Which one? I don't know. Because when he gets out, he speaks when he's not being quiet in the courtroom. It's just none of it is about any of this. And the idea that he was secretly working the phones to save the foreign aid, I don't think so.
Right.
Especially as he's been
He apparently told Johnson this was the thing to do, make some of it loans, which, sure.
Yeah. Okay, well, it's a very interesting spin. That's the best, I think, that he's got going for him is Lindsey Graham, which is amazing, but there it is.
The other thing that's kind of interesting with Trump, just as an aside, is that he's apparently telling, in not so many words, Marjorie Taylor Greene to just give it up already.
Okay. He's
given two somewhat tepid, but still supportive remarks about Mike Johnson. And shockingly, in his last one, addressed reality again, saying, look, we've got a one-vote majority, a one-vote margin of error in the House. What's he going to do?
All right.
So Trump definitely does not want to have House chaos along with his criminal.
Yeah. So. How interesting. I love the collapse of support for Marjorie Taylor Greene, of course. Now I do feel like sending her like an anonymous letter. You know, we support you. Don't let this stop you. Trump really secretly does want the chaos, but he can't be seen as. You know, so I urge her on. You know your cardboard cutout boyfriend would never fail you. You have to go forward and read between the lines. And I'd be curious to know whether if she just kept insisting on trying to oust Johnson, whether Trump would actually bash her for it and how she would react to that. But I'm afraid that she may also, she might become a disgruntled employee with guns as well. So I don't know. I don't know how she reacts to that. But it is fun to see her efforts collapsing, and it's amazing to see it continue to be covered. I think I saw something in my email today from the Hill that was like, Greene faces uphill battle to oust Johnson, to say the least. She has 3 votes for it, I think.
Possibly more. One of the things that came up last night, I don't know if you saw Tony Gonzalez's rant on Sunday.
I heard
about the scumbags he serves with. Matt Gaetz, paying minors to have sex at drug parties.
Yeah, routine things.
Who else did he attack? One of Bob Good.
Yes.
Campaigning.
For his
with
opponent.
a neo-Nazi.
Right.
Last night, Johnson had a fundraiser for Tony Gonzalez.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So, and the Freedom Caucus is really, really, really pissed. Of course, Gonzalez, and trying to figure out how they can retaliate.
Yes. Not a lot of options for it, but yeah, interesting.
So if Johnson is saying, F you guys, we've got Tony Gonzalez, we need to keep him.
Okay.
I'm here.
There may be some.
It could enrage more of the Freedom Caucus types to join in with Greene. But
interesting
it's still
itself.
Doomed. At this point, Democrats, probably not all of them, but enough.
Yeah.
Will vote to save Johnson because, he finally did right by Ukraine, and they need to continue to establish some kind of rapport, some kind of bridge there, because there's still stuff to do. Like by September 30th.
Oh. We're back
to usual
that.
Government funding problem.
Yeah, right. Well, that is an annual issue, and so we could end up back there. It seems far away, I guess, just because we're usually dealing with hours to get an appropriations bill passed before a shutdown. But yeah, the process begins anew. They're supposed to have already made significant progress in the committees. I don't know if they have.
They've
Probably
been
not.
having hearings.
Okay. That is their singular job. So
yes.
It's
going to be do they fight again over making massive cuts, or does Johnson just say no, we can't do that? But then there's the other problem of the Rules Committee and how much of this can you do under suspension of the rules?
Yeah.
Well,
we'll see. It'll be interesting. I'm also very interested to watch from the other side, to watch the dynamics here. If Johnson is pissing off the Freedom Caucus and they get angry, and do they realign with Marjorie Taylor Greene, whom they kicked out for whatever reason? Can they rejoin forces? Will they let her back in, or will they say, I'd like to register our displeasure about this thing with Mike Johnson, but if we do, then we're going to end up on the same side as her, and I don't like her? or does that not matter to them?
I think that's probably kind of likely. And I think that some of them, certainly not all of them, but some of them might be smart enough to keep their powder dry.
Yeah.
Battle phrase, and say, we're going to make the big fight over the budget.
I have a suggestion for them.
I don't know. Giving them any credit for being able to strategize feels weird.
Yeah, right. So I don't know, and it may just be looks like strategy from the outside, but it's the same junior high school stuff. Yeah, but I don't like her. Oh, all right. Well, then screw it. Okay. I mean, if that drives the right answer, it's okay. Now, if they really want to put us over a barrel here, or put the Congress over a barrel anyway, they could offer this a motion to vacate that aligns them with her won't be all that attractive to Democrats, though, there'll certainly still be people who say, well, I don't support the speaker or anything, but I don't know if I want to vote for vote to kick him out necessarily. But
it's easy for Democrats to say, look, we can't afford this close to the election, and with everything else going on, we really can't afford to have the House thrown into utter chaos again.
Yeah.
So just in order to operate, to function, we'll do this. And it's not like it's Kevin McCarthy who,
they were very
cheated us.
Yeah. I mean, they had very particular reasons, like you said, to oppose him. However, if they did come back to us, what if they had proposed, somebody brings me a resolution that says this resolution vacates the chair and expels Marjorie Taylor Greene? I would say, ooh. I might be on for that, and so might a number of Republicans. There you might find, but you'd need a majority to vacate the chair, but you'd need the 2/3 to get rid of Marjorie.
To expel her. And, I think you could probably get it pretty easily, honestly.
Well, they're practiced at getting 2/3 together.
One of the things that you've seen is a little bit of backpedaling from both Greene and Massey. They are not threatening to actually bring it to the floor. I think they recognize that, yes, Democrats were going to save Johnson, so that would be pointless. So they're working within the conference, supposedly, to get more people onto their side, to try to force Johnson to say he would resign as soon as the conference has settled on someone else.
I see.
Right.
Okay.
That's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, that's a safe bet. I'll take it. Oh, yeah, I'll resign as soon as you settle on someone else. See ya. Well, I'll be sticking around for a while. So it's a good framing of it, too. All right. Well, so, nothing likely to change, and she's likely to make no headway, but the good news is the policy was actually taken care of, and foreign aid on its way, and that should be a good thing. And I don't know. I mean, I guess I wonder how long Johnson lasts. I assume he makes it to the end of the Congress. And that's it.
I really don't think Republicans are going to keep the majority. But if they do, I think it's pretty unlikely that they want to keep Johnson, or that Johnson wants to continue to do it, frankly.
Yeah. Well, that'll be...
And the other thing to look out for is, yes, they just have the one vote margin. They've got margin for error.
Yeah.
Who's going to quit between now and then?
Yeah.
Is it going to be a Freedom Caucus type who's just fed up with it all and decides to throw everything into further chaos by leaving? I'll show Mike Johnson.
Yeah. Oh, that's it. Oh, that's another thing to propose to Marjorie. Say, well, I'll tell you what, one other way you could get rid of Mike Johnson as Speaker is if you resigned, there wouldn't be a Republican majority anymore. And, you take a friend with you, Democrats could reorganize the House. There you go. The best revenge against Johnson you can get. Hand over the House to Democrats. She's not smart. I guess if you frame it right, She'd never, of course, she's not the type of person who will resign. I don't know that she would ever concede defeat if she were defeated unanimously in her district. She would say something was wrong with that. But, well.
No,
anyway.
she's having too much fun with the TV camera, so I don't really foresee her leaving. But
no. But
it's fun to speculate.
Sure. Why not? All right. Well, let's see. Another thing that I see, by the way, in scrolling through, your more recent posts, I am grabbed by the Montana becomes the latest abortion battleground state for 2024. We had earlier been, reminding ourselves of the various red states that had surprised everybody with statewide abortion referenda. Is what's happening in Montana? What's the call for the headline? I hadn't got a chance to read yet.
Oh, they've started. Actually, they've been gathering signatures for a while, but they announced officially last week that they are in the signature drive to get an amendment to the Constitution securing abortion rights.
Montana.
And in Montana, it's interesting as far as the Mountain West states go, because it has always been a little bit more civil libertarian minded than its neighbors. And up until this last bit of craziness with Republicans, abortion wasn't a huge issue there. The right to choose was just something that they accepted.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
There's been a huge influx of the kinds of Republicans that moved into Idaho, into Montana as well.
Wow.
But regular Montanans, I think, are probably more immune to that than Idahoans.
Okay.
They're smarter. I don't know. So I actually think that it has a chance in Montana, and it could have a very real chance of helping John Tester keep his seat.
Okay. Well, it's a good organizing principle.
His likely opponent, Matt Sheehy, is that his first name? Is helping too. By being kind of a nut job.
Well,
lies a lot.
That's what they do.
And has some really very strange stories about when he was shot in Glacier National Park.
That's the guy. Okay.
That guy, yeah.
Yeah, that I have heard that one. Yeah, he was.
He apparently had a loaded handgun in the back of his vehicle, dropped it, grazed his arm.
Well, that never happens.
The whole story is very murky, somehow tied in with the possibility that he was shot in Afghanistan when he was serving and didn't report it because he didn't want to get his colleagues in trouble because he thought it was friendly fire.
And I'm not certain which is less likely.
That's just one of his stories about it being shot in Afghanistan. He has several contradictory stories, apparently, in his autobiography about his time being there. So
I don't know about this guy. That's weird.
And then there's the part that's probably gun safety is kind of a big deal for most Montanans.
Yeah, that's anything.
But also the guy has claimed he grew up on a family farm in Minnesota, which he did not. He grew up in a suburban lakeside community.
I see.
In Minnesota.
Yeah, called
very well-heeled parents.
Yeah.
So
Glendale Farms.
So
I live on a farm.
Again, Tester has a very good opponent in Republican.
That's something. All right.
To the abortion stuff getting onto the ballot, and I think I would put Montana lean Democrat.
All right. That's that's a scary question mark out there and has been for a while, and for a long time, Tester was considered relatively endangered, although he's a longtime incumbent and he really, he's just been.
He's Montana.
Yeah, right. That's the best way of putting
Montana.
It. And so it was hard to imagine, who would displace him? And this guy wouldn't be my first choice as a Republican strategist, I guess. Although, military and blah blah blah.
Right.
All those things. I've never heard. I mean, I've seen a lot of the gun fail stories and people covering up what really happened, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know if I'm not like that well versed in it, but it seems to me like the military is pretty, together on, oh, you've been shot. We should do something about that. And, there's like medals that go along with that and everything. And I could see where you want to protect a colleague, but like, he's saying that the bullet is still in there. Like, that's something you get taken care of. Wait, they have doctors who really know what they're doing with the bullet removal thing. And
I have no idea what's true. I should probably do some research to try to suss it out, but
I don't know if we're going to be able to do it because
it's very, very bizarre.
Yeah, and what a strange thing. And so I read something about that in passing. We'll have to dig that up too. And well, let us know if you come up with anything in your research.
I will.
But
there's another wrinkle.
Yeah.
I wouldn't call it that. Idaho is also launching a petition drive to get onto the ballot with the abortion rights measure.
Okay.
Which, go Idaho.
Surprising.
It's under the spotlight on abortion this week at the Supreme Court with its total abortion ban that only allows for saving the life of the mother, which has caused tremendous problems for physicians, emergency room physicians in particular.
Yeah.
Trying to treat pregnant women. It's one of the reasons why something like 2/3 of OBGYNs have left the state. There's a tremendous shortage of providers for just, obstetrics care in the state because of this ban.
Yeah, can imagine.
Idaho is suing the federal government because it's the emergency treatment law that says, if you are a hospital receiving Medicare funding, which is almost all hospitals, if they, take in patients that are on Medicare, they're receiving Medicare funding. They have to provide stabilizing care, which could include abortion services.
So they're suing.
So this is the case coming up in oral arguments tomorrow at the Supreme Court.
Oh. Okay.
One of the things that's kind of scary about this is the Supreme Court has already shown its hand a little bit in overturning an injunction at a lower court of to let the law go forward.
Oh, okay.
And not holding the injunction while arguments were pending before the Supreme Court. I didn't say that very coherently.
I think I get your point there, but
normally the court says, okay, it's coming up to us. Let's just let lower court rulings stand for now.
Right. And
until we can hear it. They did not.
Okay.
They said the complete ban is in effect and emergency room doctors, you're on your own trying to figure out whether or not you can save somebody's life.
Yeah. Well,
story this morning out of Idaho is related to this. The largest hospital network in the state is pushing for pregnant women to sign up with their life flight helicopter ambulance service.
Yeah, I think that's another one that crossed the transom, and I thought that's an unusual request. So you need to contract to have a ride on a standby status or something? You basically have to have hire a helicopter company?
It's like with ambulance coverage. For a lot of chronically ill and seriously ill people, they can get an ambulance package to make. It's an insurance package just with ambulance companies.
Okay, yeah, because if you're making frequent trips to the hospital, I guess that enters as part of your life.
Yes.
You've got to have that
really
insurance.
Expensive.
Yeah. And life flight even more so. I hear about that all the time. That too, a gun fail issue. People, have flown to trauma centers and find themselves with $15,000 transportation bills. But yeah, so now part of being pregnant in Idaho is go get yourself life flight insurance?
Yeah, and it's very real. Idaho Capital Sun, which reported this, said that St. Luke's told them, St. Luke's being that provider, air transports out of the state for pregnancy complications have increased from 1 in the whole of 2023 to 6 this year in just 4 months.
Relatively rare, but so 6 times more. That's easy enough to do that math, but it'll be more and more as time goes on. And wow, I mean, it's tens of thousands of dollars to get that done.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Well, people who enjoy freedom and low taxes, etc., surprisingly will, I guess, come out if it's organized properly. Will come out even in red states and say, look, you can make your own choices about abortion, but in the meantime, those of us who want to do something different are being suppressed and bankrupted. And guess what? We're all sort of living in the Mountain West to kind of get away from that, or at least that's what we always told ourselves.
Yeah.
And wow. Okay. So add that to the checklist. Montana and even Idaho. And
even Idaho.
Having that on the ballot.
Harder barrier to get onto the ballot, but
I can imagine.
They're organizing, they're talking about it, they're going to make it an issue. So at least there's that. All right.
Well, we'll cheer happily for Idaho and happily for the fact that you were able to join us today. Appreciate it. And, enjoy the week. We'll check in again. And by that time, both houses of Congress will have returned. And so we'll see what faces us then. But,
I'm sure we're going to have a plenteous week. Liberate those refrigerators.
It's about time. Good. Liberate the refrigerators. We'll do it and then get back on track with when the government's going to shut down next. I'm glad you brought that up. Very good. All right. We'll visit with you then. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Joan. Time now for us to hand things over to Justice.
NetworksRadio.com.
As you know. That comes next.
Listening to Kagro in the morning with David Waldman.
All right, and let's see what's on tap for today. Have we got it? Is it here? Where? Oh, here we go. There we go. Got to scroll back up. Trump's catch and kill scheme will be hard for him to explain away. That happening in courtroom today. And Minnesota and other Democratic-led states are marshaling the pushback on censorship by banning the book ban. How do you like that? We'll ban everything, damn it. Stay tuned.